All right, Aspire Leaders, happy holidays. I know this is hopefully a crazy time, but also a time for rest and rejuvenation. So I've got a perfect person to talk to during this holiday season. I've got Jasmine Kullar, and she's got a fantastic book called Training Teachers, Leaders in a PLC at Work. I've got it in hand. Phenomenal resource. We're going to really use this as our guide to our conversation today. So Jasmine, before we begin, will you just share a little bit about your educational and leadership journey?
Sure. First, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm very excited to be here. My journey started real differently. I was not one who always wanted to be a teacher. When I was a student, I actually wanted to get into law enforcement. That was my dream. That was my passion. I wanted to become a police officer. Ended up graduating, majoring in criminology because that's what I was going to do. And that career did not last very long. It was an incredibly short-lived career. Got out of it very quickly and decided to start working with young offenders outside of the city of Toronto up in Canada. And I would go in, I would teach them life skills, job skills, how to write a resume, how to look for a job. And from there, I really realized I enjoyed teaching. So I went back to school for teaching and ended up as a teacher, worked in middle school, high school, then went on to administration, became a high school assistant principal, then became a middle school principal. And from there went on to become an assistant superintendent. And now currently in the role that I'm in, it's kind of led me to where I am now.
That's awesome. All right, so I want to dive into this resource because like I said, I've been going through it. For those who are watching on YouTube, thank you. But you can also see the wonderful cover of this book. So I want to know, before we dive into the specific topics, like, why did you feel this resource was needed specifically for leaders on a campus?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So it actually kind of started with my own personal experience. You know, I had the opportunity to meet Rick DeFore and participate in this whole PLC workshop years and years ago as a first-year teacher, and was completely bought in, completely sold on the PLC process. So later in my journey, when I became a principal, I was super excited that I had the opportunity now to lead my school and our staff into this PLC work. So I took my teacher leadership team. We had about 15 teacher leaders, and we went to a PLC Institute in Orlando. And it was awesome. Like, teacher leaders were completely bought in, completely sold on the PLC work. They knew this was the right work. They knew that when we came back to the school, this was the work that we were going to focus on as a school. I mean, for me, it was such a win. I was able to get all these teacher leaders really excited and bought into the PLC process. So when we came back to the school, was expecting that we were going to do great things. We were going to change our school. We were going to totally, dive into professional learning communities. But it didn't happen that way. And the reason it didn't happen that way is because, as much as our teacher leaders were bought into the work, they had a really good understanding of the PLC work. The area that was missing was that leading part. They had to actually lead their colleagues. And that's, leading adults is very different than leading children. And as a principal and as assistant principals, we go through certification routes when we know we want to be a leader. We know we learn about conflict resolution and how to have tough conversations, all those things. But the teacher leaders I had on our team, they hadn't gone through any of that kind of training or courses. They were great, phenomenal teachers in teacher leadership roles, but it was a missing link for me when I realized that before I expect them to lead the PLC work, I really needed to build their skill set on how to actually lead. So that's kind of where this book came from, is just through my experiences. And since then, I've been doing this PLC work now for quite some time. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work with multiple districts across our country. And every time I sit down to work with a principal or their leadership team, that inevitably always becomes the missing link of not teaching them the PLC work, but teaching teacher leaders how to actually lead adults.
Yeah. And that's why this resource is so powerful. And I want to really start at the beginning of the book, which is such an important piece, which is the why principals need teacher leaders. So would you just answer that question? And I know, like, every leader right now is listening and going, well, of course I need teacher leaders, but I think it goes deeper than just, that simplistic statement.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I always say, I ask principals, how has the job of the principal changed? I mean, we're now in 2024, post-pandemic on top of that. How has your job changed from, let's say, if you were a principal in 2010 or 1995 or 1980? Think about the principals we maybe when we were teachers and the principals we had, over the last 20, 25 years, how has the role of the principal changed? And a lot of times principals will talk about, well, back then the principal was, that had the keys to everything, right? The books, the transportation, the buses, you're the face of the school. But when we talk about today, you're responsible for instructions, you're accountable for scores, obviously test scores, the social media impact that's had, student behaviors, there's so many things that have changed, but all the things that we were expected to do 20 years ago, we're still expected to do all those things still. Nothing's been taken off of the principal's plate. It just keeps getting added on, added on, added on. So the point of that is you cannot do this job by yourself. There is no way a principal can lead by themselves. There's just no way. So you have to have teacher leaders around you so that as a collective body, we are leading our school together. We have this monumental responsibility of improving and increasing student achievement. And you just can't do it by yourself. So the importance of having a collective body, true shared leadership, where you have a group of teachers around you, administrators around you that you've built up to lead with you, so you can really lead this work together.
Yeah, beautifully stated. And obviously principals have a lot on their plate, but our teachers do too. And, as our teacher leaders are trying to help the principal out, I'm curious, like for our listeners, our leaders, how can they help overcome barriers for our teacher leaders?
So that's a great question, and actually a chapter in the book as well.
Yes.
Well, there's two things. One, I think sometimes the biggest barrier is the principal's leadership style itself. If as a principal, you like to do everything and you like to hold everything close to the vest, and I don't want to use the word micromanage, but you're involved in every little thing, it might be a little bit tougher to trust your teacher leaders to do what you want them to do. So part of it is, how do you dress your own leadership style? Another barrier that I hear often from principals is, well, like you said, teachers have a lot on their plates. I feel guilty adding more onto their plate. And I will, say that in my experience, again, working with multiple districts, not just what I've did in my own school, but even working with other schools, teacher leaders actually enjoy being involved in the decision making of the school because it impacts them. Let's be honest, principals can come and go, but teachers are most likely going to be at that school that are going to keep moving that needle forward. And I think a lot of times we think teachers don't want to get extra involved and get more work, but if the work involves them being able to be a part of the decision making process, they're going to want to be involved because it impacts them. As long as we're not giving them busy work. And that's the key.
Yes.
You become a teacher leader and just give them busy work. That's not, we're talking really being involved in the decision-making of the school.
Yeah.
Is what it means to be a teacher leader.
Oh, for sure. They'll feel that. They know exactly what level that is. I know too, for our principals and our administrators, when they're looking for folks to help with the decision-making, to become leaders, sometimes that can be a tough process, especially trying to identify like someone that maybe hasn't been a leader before and can rise to the occasion. So, with that process, how can our leaders truly select the right people to be teacher leaders?
The first step I would say, and this is something I've noticed as well working with districts, is the teacher leader role is very ambiguous. We need to first define what is it that you want teacher leaders to do. So if you're the principal of your building or you're a superintendent of a district, what is it that you want teacher leaders to do? What is their actual job? That's step one. And I'm not talking like a formal job description or anything, but just laying out like these are the expectations of our teacher leaders in the school. That process alone is so worthwhile because as a school or as a district, you really come together to determine what is it that you want teacher leaders to do. Once you've established that quote unquote job description, then you can look into, okay, who can meet these needs the best. So when we did this years ago, again, when I was doing this with my own teacher leadership team, we had a summer retreat. And a part of the agenda on that retreat was, let's hash out our job. Like, what is your job as a teacher leader? And we wrote all these things down. We posted them on sticky notes and we put them up on chart paper. And it became very apparent that we had a need for two different kinds of teacher leaders. One was like the operational teacher leader, and one was the instructional teacher leader. So the operational teacher leader, we decided, was going to be someone who made sure, sub plans were available when a teacher on their department was going to be out, making sure bulletin boards were always up to date in their hallways for their department, celebrating, birthdays, and doing teacher duty schedules, that type of thing. The instructional teacher leader was then responsible for, being involved with the PLC work. Once we separated the roles, then teacher leaders were able to say, you know what, I'm definitely more of an operational teacher leader than I am an instructional teacher leader. And some were saying, no, I'm more an instructional teacher leader than I am an operational teacher leader. So then once we had clarity on what the role entails, then you're able to kind of put the right people in the right seat.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is something that's missing. You're talking about even just the communication of defining the roles and the perception of what an academic leader is versus an operational. I could probably see a variety of different definitions just specifically on the title alone. And then in addition to that, just the roles and responsibilities that are attached to that. Did you see anything where you had to communicate to make sure everyone was on the same level, understanding as far as what those leaders were specifically?
Oh, absolutely. The great thing was when we created this job description, we actually did it as a faculty, brainstormed the ideas initially with the teacher leaders, but then we took it back to our faculty and had the entire faculty a part of it to get their input, because one day one of them could be a teacher leader, or a current teacher leader might step down and say, this isn't for me, I don't want to do it, and might, step down from that role. So it was very important that the whole faculty was kind of, their opinions were involved in creating this school-wide job description for our teacher leaders. Once we finalized it, it was shared with everybody. It was in our faculty handbook. It was shared with everybody, so everybody knew. So because one of our responsibilities was to make sure that all of our teacher blogs were updated, because we had this issue sometimes, the last time a parent would go on a teacher's blog, and this was, of course, I was a principal years ago. So, back then the blog was a big thing. The last time it was updated was, 5 years ago. So that was one of their responsibilities, was to make sure all the blogs in their department are updated. So because it's in the job description, that's in the faculty handbook, everybody knows about it. So when a teacher leader approaches a teacher on their department to say, hey, would you mind please updating the blog? They know why the teacher leader is asking them to do that, because it's in their job description that everybody has and everybody is aware of. So that communication with the faculty was very, very important to help empower our teacher leaders as well, that everybody knew what their job was. And I'll tell you that the biggest aha, and I talk about it in the book, the biggest aha when we were creating this job description was the realization how the teacher leaders, the traditional teacher leader role, is deeply rooted in advocating for their teachers in their department, as well as communicating on behalf of the principal to their department. That is what, in this book I call the traditional teacher leader. A traditional teacher leader, their role is, you go into a meeting with the principal tells you a whole bunch of things, you take a lot of notes, and then you go back to your department and you regurgitate, the principal told me to tell you this, the principal told me to tell you this. That was a traditional teacher leader role. And, and then the other piece was advocating for the teachers in their department, always coming back to the principal and saying, I just want you to know that, the morale in my department is really, really low. And because they felt that was their role. So the realization was, a PLC teacher leader is not advocating for the teachers in their department, but a PLC teacher leader is advocating for the students in their department. And that was a big shift, that we're here to advocate for the students in your department. And the other shift was, you're not communicating on behalf of me, we're communicating together as a leadership team. So those are some examples of how we really shifted the thinking of what the role was as a traditional teacher leader to what the role is if we're trying to become a professional learning community.
Yeah, that's an important mind shift there. I want to talk more about leadership skills. I know the majority of the book really does a beautiful job of talking through how our leaders can develop leadership skills within our teachers. And literally the chapters is like a skill, going through. Obviously, for time purposes, we can't go through every leadership skill that needs to be developed with our leaders. But I was wondering if you wouldn't mind picking maybe one or two areas really for us to start focusing on in this work as we're looking at our leadership team.
Yeah, so in the book there's 10,
Yeah,
and I believe all 10 are very, very important. And I
agreed.
also would recommend don't try to do all 10 in 1 year.
No.
I wouldn't do that. I mean, the book is really designed for you to work with your teacher leadership team for a 2-year period at least, because some of those skills it took that long to really develop. One of the skills that I'll just mention right off the bat is courage. Having the courage to have tough conversations with your colleagues. That's not a skill that's gonna, you're gonna develop it overnight. That skill is going to take a lot of time. Even I'm sure for you and myself, we've been in leadership roles for a long time, and there's never a day where I go to bed saying, oh, I can't wait to have this tough conversation tomorrow when I get to the office. Nobody likes them. They're uncomfortable, they're awkward, we don't want to hurt people's feelings, get all that. However, we know as a leader how important that is to be able to have tough conversations. So that courage piece is a skill that we probably spent 2 years on. We did a lot of role playing with our teacher leaders in our leadership meetings. So our teacher leadership meetings were very not traditional. And we did role playing. We discussed scenarios. Okay, you have a colleague in your department who just did this. What would you say to them? What are the words that would come out of your mouth? What would you say? And the more role playing we did, the more feedback we gave each other, the more comfortable they became when those situations really did happen in their departments. So courage is one of those skills that we spent a lot of time really building and developing. Another one was problem solving. I heard this quote, which really has resonated for me, and I don't know who said it, so I can't take credit for it. But the quote was, the more problem solvers you have in your building, the less problems you're going to have. And if you think about it, in a lot of traditional schools, there's problems. I mean, problems happen everywhere. But if you're going to wait for the principal to solve them, you're going to be waiting a long time. So when you have multiple problem solvers spread out through the building in all these different departments, problems come up and they solve them. That's what you do. If there's a problem in the biology department, the biology chair solved it, or the science department chair solved it. There's a problem in the second grade hallway, the second grade team leader solved it. So that idea of problem solving was another skill that we really talked about. How do you look for problems in your department? How do you be proactive to looking for problems? But then how can you come with solutions and try to minimize some of these problems that might occur in your department or your grade level? So problem solving is another skill that's going to take a minute to develop. I'll talk a little bit about the emotional intelligence piece.
Yes.
That's a big one too, because I get it. Sometimes we react to things instead of taking our time and responding to things. So even talking to teacher leaders and training teacher leaders on how do you really strengthen that emotional intelligence piece where we're not, I get it, being aware of your emotions when you're getting upset at something. How do you create that skill set, or how do you build your skill set to kind of be aware that right now you're getting upset with a colleague, or maybe it's a parent, because as a teacher leader, that's something we want you to model, is how you handle parents as well. So just being able to respond more than we react is another skill set that all leaders need. We all need it. So that was a skill set that we really all worked together in developing and building. And that was the beauty of this, is as teacher leaders, because we're all leaders together, these are skills that we all need to build. It's not something that I would tell teacher leaders, that's something you all need to work on, because I already got all these skills. It's not, we're all doing it together. And it's great to find accountability partners that way too, when we're all in it together, because we're all trying to develop our leadership skill set so that we can ultimately lead the work in our building.
Yeah, no one's perfect in any of these skills. We can all grow, and iron sharpens iron. So it's good to make sure that your team as a whole is working on those things. So again, the book is Training Teacher Leaders in a PLC at Work, a guide to cultivating shared leadership. Wonderful resource. This is a problem that every leader that's listening has. In addition to the fact that every year there's new leaders. Sometimes even mid-year, you're looking for new positions, or people are retiring, and you're having some changeover. And so you need to make sure that you're building something that's sustainable and that can last for a long time as you're a building leader. So a beautiful resource, highly recommended. The link will be in the show notes for folks over at joshstamper.com, or if you're on a podcast player, it'll be in the show notes there for folks to click. Highly recommend the book. grab it for yourself. It's something that you can implement right away. I want to talk about real quick, Jasmine, a second book that you've got that I know the manuscript's done, but I would love to know more about this book. I know it's more for superintendents, district leaders. Would you just share kind of what you've got constructed?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I actually got two co-authors on that book with me, Bruce
Awesome.
Fraser and Lisa Riddell. And the three of us we just turned in our manuscript, and the working title right now is Leading Leaders. But really, in essence, it's about a book for superintendents and assistant superintendents who supervise principals. So, principals, one of the challenges with supervising principals is you're not technically in the building with them every single day the way you are as a principal supervising your teachers. So there's some challenges sometimes when it comes to supporting and supervising and monitoring the work that schools are doing. So this book is really designed to help principal supervisors lead some of this work.
Very cool. So make sure that you're checking that out as soon as that second book comes out. Obviously, it's going to be a powerful resource. With that, Jasmine, I just want to ask you a question because it's great that folks are listening, but I want them to take an actionable item with them. So for our aspiring and current leaders, if there's something to do tomorrow or next week to enhance their leadership journey, what would you recommend?
The first thing I would recommend right now is to do a self-assessment. And there's plenty of self-assessments in the book, or you can find them online. I would recommend take a look at your teacher leaders right now that are on your teacher leadership team, and every one of them is bringing a strength. There's no question, there's no doubt. Every single one of them is bringing a strength to the team. What are those strengths that they're bringing? And then based on that, what are some areas that need to be improved on? So for example, if you have a teacher leadership team where everybody on the team is really good at problem solving, okay, that's awesome. Celebrate that, recognize that, but then you might realize that some of their challenges is having those tough conversations with their colleagues. Doing a self-assessment with your teacher leaders is, I would say, step one, because from there you can really determine your course of action in terms of providing that professional development or providing that training to your teacher leaders. Be specific on which leadership skill is it that you want to celebrate and recognize that this is something we're doing really, really well. And what's a leadership skill that you feel like, okay, this is the one that we're going to really focus on for this particular school year. So I would recommend starting with a self-assessment. So as a principal, do assessment on your teacher leadership team, and then allowing the opportunity for your teacher leaders to also do an assessment on their own leadership skill set so they can identify the strengths they have and the areas that they would like to grow in and learn more about. So self-assessment is what I would probably say first.
Yeah, perfect time for that too.
Yeah.
As folks are getting into the holiday break. So yeah, with that, I want to make sure everyone's connecting with Jasmine. I'm going to have a link in the show notes and again on joshtamper.com, which will be her solution tree author page for you to connect. And then of course, her resources will be on there. And then I'll have, like I said, additional information about the book in the show notes too. So yeah, definitely check out the book. It's phenomenal. Like I said, I have it in hand for those who are watching YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in at Josh Tamper as the channel is growing. So make sure that you're liking the video, subscribing, and then of course you can find all this information on my website, joshtamper.com. So with that, Jasmine, I just appreciate you so much. Thank you for being a wonderful guest and someone that's just impacting so many leaders throughout our country. You are doing phenomenal work, and it's just an honor to speak with you today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.